Hello, folks. I think this is episode number 10. I think I've broken into double digits finally. Of my platform thinking conversations with people around the planet. They've been super fun so far. Feel like I'm learning a lot. And today I'm excited to have Paula with us. I met Paula a couple months ago in London. We were hanging out and we were talking about platform stuff. And so I was excited to have her come on and tell us some of her thoughts and experiences in the platforming world. Paula, do you want to introduce yourself to everybody?
Yeah, hi everybody. My name is Paula Kennedy. I am the COO. Sorry, there goes Rosie, my dog, walking past. I am COO, Chief Operating Officer of a startup called Syntasso. Our mission is to make platform teams thrive. So we're very focused on the platform engineering space. I've been in this area for quite a long time. So I previously did a startup called Cloud Credo, which got acquired by Pivotal, and I was running platform services in Europe for Pivotal Cloud Foundry, which then got acquired by VMware, and then left VMware 2 years ago to do my new startup, which is Syntasso.
Cool. So how did Syntasso get started? Is it based on, did you guys just start from scratch? Was it a project first, or how did you guys get into it?
It's a good question. So my co-founders have been on a similar journey to me. We've been working together. We did Cloud Credo together 10 years ago. So Cloud Credo was a startup mostly focused on sort of services and consulting around Cloud Foundry. Then at that point, we were just trying to work with companies who were using Cloud Foundry and trying to set up platform engineering teams. So like I said, I've been in this space quite a long time. And then through the journey of acquisition by Pivotal and then working in VMware, the three of us have been on this similar journey, trying to solve problems with customers who are building platforms.
Yeah.
And what happened was post the VMware acquisition, obviously for company size, we went from a small startup to a 3,000 person company to a 30,000 person company. And so the three of us were like, actually, we'd like to go back into startup life again.
Yeah.
But it wasn't so much that this was kind of a project that had been brewing for a while. It was almost like just a continuation of the same thing. We'd learned some lessons from working on Cloud Foundry. And then we'd learned some lessons working within VMware on PKS, which is kind of part of the Tanzu suite. And what we've been learning is that there's not really a one size fits all. Customers right now are facing either trying to use a platform as a service product like Cloud Foundry, which is fantastic for certain things, but is a bit of a big black box, and it's hard to decompose and pull it apart and customize it.
Yeah.
And then customers have been on this journey with Kubernetes, which is sort of the opposite end of the spectrum, right? People are trying to take low-level constructs and build their own platforms from scratch, which is a massive engineering task. So the idea for Syntasso, the product we're working on, which is called Kratix, the idea has been brewing in our team and our collective brains through this journey of years of learning and experience and pain. And so when we collectively said, let's try again in a startup to solve what we see as this big challenge, this challenge of big platform versus do it yourself. And we've been going, like I say, just over 2 years. We've been thinking about the problem. We've been noodling on it. We've been doing lots of conversations with people who we know have this pain. And that's what has led us to where we are today, which is we have this framework we built, which I mentioned, Kratix, and we're really trying to help platform teams to get the best out of build and buy. It's not one versus the other in our mind. It's kind of both. That was a long answer. I'm sorry.
No, it's good. I mean, we should do the what is a platform question, and then we can go back to that. I think I have a couple other questions or thoughts based on our conversations before, but I've been asking all of the participants in my fun little game here. What do you think a platform is? There's so many different definitions. Some are very abstract, some are very concrete. I read an article you wrote quoting Eric. I think it was Eric's definition, which was like super clean. But what do you think? How should we think about a platform, at least for this conversation?
So I think you're right. If you ask 10 people what a platform is, you're going to get 10 different answers. I was asked last week by somebody if I was in the pub and somebody asked me to describe it in the simplest terms possible. How would I describe it? And I tried to describe it. Sorry, the dog's going crazy. I tried to describe it like a platform is a sandwich filler. My best description I could come up with. So the way I described it was, you've got the bottom layer of bread is your infrastructure. Yep. That might be cloud, that might be on-prem, that might be Kubernetes, that could be anything that is kind of your infrastructure layer. Yep. And then you've got your top piece of bread, which is whatever is customer facing.
Yep.
That's your applications, that's kind of the running code that people are getting access to. And then your platform is the filler. So depending on your favorite sandwich, it might be ham and cheese, or I don't know, like whatever your favorite sandwich filler is, that's your platform. And the quality of that platform can vary wildly, like any sandwich ingredients, let's just say, if I take the analogy a bit too far. But basically, there was a quote from Kelsey Hightower, which was quite a few years ago now, but he said, everyone's got a platform. You're either, building it yourself or you're running on it, but you've got platform somewhere.
100%.
And it's a bit like a friend of mine, Abby Bangser. She always says that everybody's got a CI/CD pipeline because they're putting stuff into code. They've either got one that's well managed and well structured, or they've got one that's like a total shambles. But at some point, you've got a path to production, which is deploying code.
100%.
And I think that's true for platforms. Everybody's got a platform. It could be a really clean kind of API, which has got a beautiful developer experience and everyone's using it. Or it could be a total mishmash of stuff.
Yep.
And anything in between. Oh, no.
I can hear you, but you froze. Hopefully you won't
hello?
go all the way away. I can hear you. Uh-oh. Hopefully Paula will make it back.
I'm so sorry.
You made it back.
I did. I'm so sorry. My internet did the same thing to me last night, and I don't know what's going on. I'm so sorry.
It's all good. The beauty is I can edit it, and
Oh,
then it'll just be gone.
nice.
Nobody will ever know. I mean, other than the two people watching. Okay, so we did a little bit of platform and definition.
Yes.
I like this. I've been saying to people a similar thing, kind of like you have a platform, whether or not you like it. It might be ServiceNow tickets. It might be calling people on the phone. It might be a bunch of people running around making sure stuff isn't on fire all the time. Those are all platforms. They are more or less resilient. They're more or less sustainable platforms, but they are platforms.
Absolutely.
And I often think, like, because so many places I look, you have these kind of evolutionary pressures that are causing platform problems to occur, right? Like, I think that a lot of organizations were doing fine with some of these things, and now it's just they're reaching kind of stretching points where they can't manage the level of complexity that they used to be able to manage manually anymore, right? Like it's just too much now.
Yeah, but it's also, I agree completely, and not just technical complexity, but I've talked in the past about cognitive load. It's the load on the people as well.
Yep.
So, I mean, I think we've talked about this before, but that evolution we've seen of the DevOps, you build it, you run it principles, and then that's seemed to translate in organizations where that means a DevOps team has to build the platform and run the platform and build the applications and run the applications. And that just in itself is not just a technical challenge, but it's so much that people have to keep in their heads and understand about the entire stack. It's just overwhelming.
Yeah, I agree. And I also think, like, so I think sometimes I say to people, it seems obvious you have like a software development lifecycle. You have some sort of understanding in your organization, again, with relative levels of maturity, about how to deploy software, applications, functions, features. You either do it like frequently or weekly or biweekly or quarterly. You do, or you do a release train or whatever. So you've got some sort of cycle time ideas about releasing features into the world. And I think if you have a reasonably good central IT group, they have to do, and you have on-prem at least, you have to do some significant amount of cycle planning on how many CPUs we're going to need this year, how much network bandwidth, all this kind of stuff, right? So that's it. But that's a kind of like to me, it's a different kind of time cycle. Yeah. And when they get entangled on each other, bad things happen, right? Like when the central IT department comes and says they're no longer supporting that version of Oracle anymore, and everybody has to upgrade all at once, cause all sorts of bad things to happen, right? And so I think the platform is just this other. It's not only just this layer; it's a different cycle time. There's a different life cycle to the platform, right? And I feel like organizations that fail to recognize this, how long you should be waiting to turn the platform over, how frequently you have to rebuild it, how frequently you have to update it, all those things makes it a little confusing for people to figure out where they are. Is this just another form of infrastructure, or is this actually some other thing that's sitting on top of things that move a little bit slower, like an infrastructure layer?
Yeah, it's definitely confusing. It's we've been playing around with the idea. I don't know if there was a great talk from Gregor Hope last year in the Platform Con, and he talked about this kind of floating platform, and he described it as being kind of constantly evolving. But I agree with you. It's not maybe on the same cycle time as the other parts of the stack, let's say, but it does need to evolve. I think that's one thing that I've certainly found in my experience, is that in the cases where people either think of a platform as a off the shelf, I'm just going to buy it and it's just going to run solution, or people think, well, I'm going to build it myself, but it's going to be a project, and once it's built, it's done.
Right.
In both of those mindsets, there isn't a thought of the platform needs to continuously evolve, because the platform has to take in changes that are happening at the infrastructure level and demands that the application teams are needing from the kind of the application level. And the platform has to try to be always kind of rising above. That's Gregor's point. It's like floating above, so it can incorporate changes and always be kind of that thinnest layer above all the sort of complexity underneath to give the developers what they need. So it's funny if you I hadn't thought about it before, but if you think about that kind of speed, maybe infrastructure changes are happening the least frequently, and then you've got the platform needing to try and evolve in the middle, and then you've got like features being released on the top. Yeah, it's quite interesting to think about the cycle time for the different parts.
And I feel like, sometimes I say to people, like, it's the way that you want to manage the things in the cycle time is a little different, right? So like in the front end, with features, you want to be able to release quickly. And I sometimes say to people, like, you don't want to do the rope-a-dope thing, right? Do you know what rope-a-dope is? It's like Muhammad Ali, and he would get up against a rope and let people swing at him a bunch of times until they got tired, and then he'd knock them out, right? And I try to say to people sometimes, like, if you've got a good platform, what you're doing is you're basically untying your developers' hands so that they can hit when they want to, which is different than saying they can go really fast all the time. But they now have kind of like an ability to hit market timings and stuff like that they probably didn't have beforehand. Whereas on the back end, a lot of that, a lot of optimization around true kind of infrastructural components have to do more with not overbuying, not overpurchasing, and not underpurchasing, right? Like there's this weird balance where you got to make sure that you get the right amount of stuff. You don't want to have too many dark CPUs. You don't want to have too much dark network. But also you don't want to run out of those things, right? And so then you get all sorts of really interesting things when you kind of mix cloud in there about like how you're managing those types of economics with a provider as opposed to doing it yourself. But those economics don't go away in my mind, right? There's still this weird betting thing that's got to go on. And then the platform just seems different to me. It seems like a different type. To me, it feels like a way of creating a clutch or something to prevent these two cycle times that are so antagonistic to each other from actually touching or something like that. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, the way we try to think about it, like I say, if I go back to that kind of the intention of DevOps, which for me was originally around trying to find ways to deploy software better and faster, right? Like that was the intention. And the problem it was trying to solve for was sort of what you've just described, right? Developers needing to go at a certain speed and ops wanting to hold back everything because, things are slow and risky, so they don't want to change too much and they don't want to be responsible for code that they haven't written. And all those problems, right? All those problems that we've seen with kind of dev and ops separate. And I think with platform engineering specifically, like I say, it is trying to bridge that gap, but in a different way. So I've had conversations with people in the past where they've asked about, well, is platform engineering just, going back to actually platform engineering is just a rebrand of ops, and then you've got devs and you've got ops. But for me, no. For me, it's a way of trying, because what you really want to aim for is you want your application teams to be doing DevOps in a way that they can self-serve what they need to deploy when they want to, like you described, right? They need to be able to kind of punch when they want to without having their hands tied. But that doesn't mean they have to do it continuously. It just means they need to be, when they need something, it needs to be available to them as a service on demand. But then when they do deploy something, they then want that responsibility of being able to kind of build the feature and run the feature and have observability and be able to check that things are running because they have control of their domain, which is kind of that business value. But then where it's different on the platform side is the platform team is not just operating the infrastructure, or it's not just operating kind of the code and keeping it running. The platform team is responsible for DevOps as far as developing and operating their platform. If they can develop the platform such that it offers the app teams what they need as a service, and the platform team itself is developing and running its own software, which is the platform, which might be just an API, or it may be like wiring a whole bunch of stuff together. But then you end up in a situation where it's kind of DevOps all the way down. So you've got app teams doing DevOps and you've got platform teams doing DevOps. And they both are able to control the things they need to control and rely on kind of the things that they need when they need them being available.
Wait, my shirt is in there.
So I think I think that, one of the things that another thing that kind of is resonant with me is this idea that, so many people draw value streams nowadays, and they draw the value stream going through the platform, right? So they're like, there's some idea, and then blah blah blah, and that at some point there's a platform team, and value somehow flows through the platform team to get to production. It's like they're going down the stacks or something like that. I think it's a little strange to me, but my point being, I think it makes more sense the way you're describing it, where the platform is a value stream. It's its own value stream. It produces its own artifacts, its own operating services, its own things, right? And so we shouldn't necessarily think about it as cutting through. We should think about it as being like the input into some of these other value streams, right? Like the value streams assume something is available in the platform, some set of promises or being offered by the platform that they can build stuff on. It just seems to me to make the kind of flow a little bit different than what I see other people imagining it as. Sometimes they confuse like value stream with CI/CD pipelines or something like that, right? Like they look like both a way to get to production, but they're not really the same thing or something. I don't know.
Yeah, that's quite interesting. I was at so I helped organize an event recently, which was called Fast Flow Conf, but it was focused on team topologies.
Mm-hmm.
So it was a 1-day 2-track event, and all the topics, all the presentations were basically how people have applied team topologies in the world, which is, I don't know if you know the book well, but it's a book by Matthew Skelton and Manuel Pace from 2019. And if you for the listeners out there, I strongly recommend it. I think I quote it every time I speak, but strong recommend. Basically, in that book, they talk about kind of teams, as you might imagine, because it's called team topologies. But they talk about platform team and kind of stream aligned teams.
Yeah.
To your point, but the platform team, they're very focused on this concept of platform as a product.
Yep.
And they're very focused on, making the team boundaries, sort of having a team API so that the team interactions are frictionless or close to frictionless, so that, like you say, it's not like things are kind of linear going through from infrastructure through to platform through to app teams. It's more the app team is providing these things as a service with this product mindset, and then the app teams are consuming these services. And so both platform and app teams have their value streams, like you say.
Yeah, I said like I have two different thoughts at the same time. I'm trying to figure out which one I want to pursue first. So like one of the things that I think about when I hear like self-service, which obviously is a thing that has to be part of these platforms. I'm not in any way arguing that, but it seems like a lot of the conversation ends up being like the bottom of the stack produces something that's consumed further and further up the stack, right? It's kind of like this way. But I keep on wondering, like, if I think of things like SLOs and performance metrics and, having an understanding what good looks like for the application, like it should be operating within these kind of constraints, or we expect this amount of traffic or something like that. So I almost like one of the ways that I almost imagine it needing to be, to some extent, if we want to kind of like make the platforms more useful for operators, not just for developers, is that it's possible that an application team should have to like configure the platform by telling it things like, this is what good looks like. This is, we should be, when deploying onto a platform, informing the platform of a bunch of things to allow the operators of the platform, not just my application, to know that my application is running as expected, and it's not, for instance, running out of control or whatever. But I so rarely see anything other than like configure, as in like make me have this much RAM and stuff, and give it to me. But the kind of other version of it, which is the application teams talking to the platform operators through an API. You know what I'm saying? Like, that 100%. Seems to be missing.
I mean, I've got two thoughts on that. One thing that the Team Topologies book advocates for strongly is this. They describe it as, I think, ongoing lightweight collaboration.
Mhm.
So they very much advocate for like these APIs where teams can kind of communicate, but also, as I mentioned, it's not like building a platform, whatever the platform looks like, whatever shape and size it is. It's not there's a shift in mindset for platform teams to think that it's not for them to look at the state of the world and decide what other services they should offer, because the platform is built in service of the people using it. So they do need to have a way of receiving that type of feedback that you just described. That could be through some API, that could be through, I don't know, some Jira tickets, that could be through a once a week team meeting. The mechanism is kind of less important than the mindset that says, this platform is here for the users. If the users need it to change, or they need it to evolve, or they need this new functionality, like that should be incorporated on an ongoing basis. And the other thing that particularly resonates for me, I mentioned that my company's building a framework. This is not a product pitch, but one of the things that we're exploring with our design partners is, if this framework that we're working on is kind of a scaffolding, we talk about it a little bit like a vending machine. So the platform team is providing the vending machine and can stock it with some things that the application teams need. And it's also then possible for other parts of an organization to stock it with things that they've written themselves.
Right.
So if you have a particular, in a team topologies language, if you have a complicated subsystem team that is working on databases as a service, for example, then that team could potentially populate those services into a framework. So it's not all on the platform team to offer everything, or to write everything. The platform team can be curating a platform that is pulling in the best off the shelf, plus pulling in the best of other things that internal parts of the organization have written. And that can include app teams, right? If you've got somebody on an app team that's a particular specialist on, I don't know, some kind of user access that's internal to the organization, bespoke, written by the team, owned by the team, closed source code, they can give that back to the platform team and say, this is now, good enough. You can kind of offer it out to other teams in the organization and have a contract of like, if there's an issue, how you're going to support it. But that's a way of platforms being more collaborative, like I say, not just coming from one team that's trying to offer everything, but making it possible to pull in other specialties from within an organization.
I mean, so I love that. One of the things that one of my ranty things that I talk about when I talk about platforms, sometimes I say people need to push more patches and less tickets. And what I mean by that is that if you use a ticket-based mechanism to manage your platform and the platform becomes successful, it will drown in its own success because you'll just massively overload it with lots of requests because people want to use it now. And then it'll be, your entire life will be juggling tickets to figure out what to develop next. It's a huge pain in the ass. And it almost certainly means that you're going to dissatisfy some amount of the users in your organization when you do that. And that's going to slow down the adoption of the platform, right? As opposed to like, so I've been trying to convince people that like platform components have different qualities than application components might have. So like, for instance, you were saying like, we have some sort of like user authentication, right? So you can imagine if that was built for an application, it wouldn't have things like maybe multi-tenancy, or it wouldn't be hooked into like the global logging framework, or it wouldn't be hooked into some sort of observability system that already exists or something like that. And so to me, like there's this weird thing that you want to have happen, which is you basically want to have people push lower quality, not platform quality code to the platform team and have the platform team upgrade it and make it platformy, right? So that you then have this like, it's not that I'm developing from scratch. I'm improving the quality of code that's already proven to be useful and successful in my environment, right? I'm not building stuff from scratch.
Exactly. There's a great again, I'm referencing PlatformCon, but there's a great talk from a guy called Mathieu Frenet. He's from Nesto, which is a Canadian-based firm, and he talks about. So he runs a platform team at Nesto, and he's got this really great talk where he talks a bit about golden paths, but not golden cages.
Yeah.
And it's similar to what you just described. So he talks about how within his platform organization, what they focus on is the most common patterns and the most kind of useful things that are requested by the most number of teams, let's say, are do you use with kind of the platform quality, right? So they are on the platform, offered out to the teams, and platform team kind of builds, maintains, etc. And then they've got teams that have kind of specialist requirements, and that team might have the services out, and the platform team doesn't block them, right? It's not trying to cage them. It's trying to say, okay, here's the golden path that the platform team has tested and is supporting, and we know that this all works. And if you follow this path, it's going to be amazing. But there are situations where a team needs something different. There are situations where a team wants to innovate or try something new, or play around with something, experiment, and so have at it. But team, you can do that, and you're running it, and you're supporting it.
That's right.
And if it's then a proven good use case for whatever the thing is, then, and it could be useful to other teams, then the platform team can take it on. And to your point, they're then not starting from scratch. They've got something that's already proven its value to a team, and the platform team can then offer that as a service to other teams.
That's right.
And so you're sharing best practices, and you're sharing the kind of the path that someone's already proven out, and it's making it more valuable to the organization.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. So, and we talked about this a little bit last time we talked in London, and I really liked it, and I think it's. I want to ask it in a different kind of way, but we kind of talked about this idea of like there's like maybe a monolithical style platform. Like I have put it all together. It's very opinionated. You shall use my platform as I give it to you, type thing. Then we talked about maybe the opposite. Like I have offered you access to a bunch of self-service primitives. You figure out what to do with the CPU compute and the network and stuff like that. I don't care. These seem to be like questions about granularity, like what is the appropriate size of the components that the system should be kind of made up of and stuff like that. So I think some interesting kind of questions there. But the other thing we did talk about in relation to that was kind of the idea of maybe what we need is decomposable platforms. So like we should offer a opinionated platform, but offer it in such a way that it would be easy to decompose it into pieces and replace subsets. Again, to get to your idea that certain people have certain needs. And so the weird version of the question that I kind of wanted to ask, though, was, you worked with people at Pivotal on Cloud Foundry, and my understanding of Pivotal is that they had extremely rigid or rigorous XP practices, kind of pair programming. So like, very sophisticated developers, right? That are probably really leveraging that platform pretty well. But I assume that now that you're out of Pivotal, you have teams that don't do that type of stuff. So there seems like there's probably different kinds of developers and development teams. And does this impact the way that we have to think about the platform? In a way, like certain people will want the platform to look more complex than other people, or am I wrong?
No, you're right. I think the one of the biggest learnings my team and I have taken from like our entire journey with Cloud Foundry, and like I say, we were working with it since 2012, so before Pivotal existed. And it was sort of interesting because Cloud Foundry started at VMware and then was spun out into Pivotal and is now back into VMware again. So that whole journey, we've been working with Cloud Foundry. And one of the lessons we've learned is that what we tried to do, or at least from my perspective, what we tried to do at Pivotal was we tried to build the platform that would serve everybody's needs. Right? It was the super high level abstraction. It was the amazing developer experience with the CF push, and I don't care about here's my source code, run it in the cloud for me, I don't care how. It's kind of our haiku. Words along that line. And so we tried to offer this amazing developer experience and offer this platform that was highly opinionated and it could meet everybody's needs, right? That was our goal. We had at one point, we had a kind of an internal mission, which was like the one true platform.
Yeah.
That's what we thought about. And what it turned out was we could offer a platform that could meet, 90% of everybody's needs and 100% of nobody's needs. Because that last 10% for all these organizations, and we work with some very mature companies. Don't get me wrong. These big Fortune 500 companies who had big engineering teams and mature engineering practices and the whole scale of like maturity of practices. But we work with all these different companies and we could, like I say, meet 90% of needs, but 100% of no one's needs because everybody, that last 10% was different.
Yeah.
And so people wanted to decompose it. They needed to break it apart. And then you get into the whole world of, well, if you've cracked open this and you've done this, then you're not in support anymore because you've kind of like hacked the code and now it's not supported by us, like all that kind of minefield. But then, like you say, you go into the here is your set of primitives, you do what you want, I don't care how. That's a whole different ballgame. It's a whole different ballgame. And we've seen that with Kubernetes. And you look at the CNCF landscape and the complexity and the number of tool choices and do these things work together? Do they hook in together? All of that complexity. And so that's where, like I said, I mentioned at the start, that's kind of where we've come from as this team, trying to build our software that we're working on. And also, it's through these lessons that we've learned, right? We see this all the time. And so these days, I think what you end up with is you've got companies that have this complete mishmash. Yeah. I mean, they talk about kind of hybrid cloud where people have got multiple different cloud providers or on-prem and cloud, et cetera, but you've actually got kind of multi-platform as well. Like the platform is just, it's a wide range of stuff with different apps running in different places using different technologies. And so I think composability, one thing we think about right now is within any organization, even within one org, you've got multiple skill sets with your teams. And what you need to be able to do is for those people that really want to get into the nitty gritty and turn all the dials and fiddle with all the specifics of whatever given service it is, you need to allow that because there could be specific reasons why someone needs to vary, like the CPU or some other thing. They need to be able to twiddle all the little knobs and dials. And there'll be another team in the same organization that's like, give me a database. I want it medium size and I want it running in AWS. Right. That's all I care about. Right? That's right. Yeah. And I think one power that platform teams have and that they should aim for is to be able to give that flexibility to teams, whether that's by access control, whether it's by, team name, like there's different ways that people might want to offer that. Yep. But that's essential to be able to kind of meet the skills within an organization and the demands within an organization. Yeah.
I mean, it's just, to me, it seems like, again, this idea, like you're saying, like composable and decomposable, one of the kind of paradigm shifts that I love to like think through is like, so like eBay had this giant E10,000, right? Right around the time that Google starts using commodity hardware. And so what, like you get this is like a prime example, these two different architectural theories. The biggest machine possible, make it as massively redundant internally as possible, blah, blah, blah. But if that machine goes down, all of eBay's down until you get that machine back up. Or this other thing, which requires you to tell the developers this weird thing, which is you must assume that at any time, the node that you're working on will just literally disappear out from underneath your feet. Like it just won't be there. And you have to assume that. And that's how you have to build your software. I feel like this idea of decomposability of a platform is a similar type of like mind shift, because it's literally saying, no, you have to build both an opinionated and composable system. And you can't build one or the other. Because again, some parts of your organization will want a highly composed, highly opinionated version of this, and they will absolutely not want to pay for, work on, figure out some sort of weird, complex subsystem. They just want it to work. And other people were like, no, I have to like access specialized GPUs in order to do this bizarro calculation. And I need direct access to certain STDs or something like that. Like, there are these edge cases, right? But so like,
exactly.
thinking through that like decomposability as an architectural principle for these platforms, I think it's just an interesting kind of problem to think through to some extent.
It is interesting. It's also interesting when you think about it through the lens of onboarding teams and new people into an organization, right? Because where you've got people coming in and you want them to be as productive as possible, as quickly as possible, right?
Yep.
You might find a situation where you have kind of like for new people coming on board, you don't give them everything to twiddle around with. You're like, this is the golden path, or this is like the beginner path, or whatever, however you frame it. But like for right now, you're going to come on and your focus is this, and therefore you've got this super smooth highway to get everything that you need done. And then as you are learning within the organization and as you're upskilling, actually you may now have opinions that you do need to have more flexibility. And that's where, as the teams mature or individuals kind of grow in their skill set, they then can go back to the platform team and say, now I need this, or now I've learned this thing, but now I need this extra thing. And it's that continuous evolving and that lightweight collaboration between the developers and the platform team that makes sure that you are offering the right abstractions to the right people at the right time. Which does sound quite complicated, but I think that's the value. That's where the platform teams really can offer that value.
Agreed. Yeah. So, sometimes when I think about the platform stuff, I one of the things I'm always trying to figure out is, I feel like if you are a platform team, you probably have a subtly different skill set than if you're on an application team. Let's say you're the platform developers, right? The people who are developing the platforms, or even the platform operators, right? People who are operating the platform. I feel like there's probably a subtly different skill set for the people in that platform group than on an application team. So like some of the ones I might think of like right off the bat would be like learning to negotiate amongst multiple teams that are not your external customers. They're your internal customers, and that therefore they're maybe your peers, or potentially like they belong to some other part of the organization. And like there's politics involved in there. That's a bit different. So that's one of the things that I think. And then other obvious ones, like I feel like platform teams probably have to deal with things like service meshes and API management and API versioning. Those seem to be like really core skills that you'd have to have. So do you have any in your experience, like what do you think if you were developing a platform team, what are the type of like practices or skills that you think are relatively unique, or do you think you can just pluck a application team and have them start building a platform?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think there's certainly that internal challenge that you just described. I would agree that is subtly different, because the chances are if you're an application team and let's say you're developing a online shopping app, for example, the chances are you don't regularly like go and have lunch or go down the pub with the people that are using your app. Whereas if you're in the platform team, like the people who are using your platform could also be your lunch buddies.
Absolutely.
You could find that kind of clash of they wanted something and they've raised the ticket and now they're sitting in front of you, like poking you in the chest with a finger, right? So there's definitely some people kind of socio-technical, like those kind of like distinctions. But in terms of pure engineering practices, I think there's lots and lots of overlap, actually. So when we're working in my team right now, like we have a team of people who are building our platform framework, and we're pair programming all the time, right? And test-driven development and all the things that we think of as engineering best practices that you might apply to your software that's going out to customers. Apply just the same to the platform. I mean, particularly for us, we've been, even in Pivotal days, we were always advocating for platform teams to have a product manager the same way as your external facing products, to potentially have a designer in your platform team to really think about the user experience of the platform. And so whilst I agree there's probably some subtle differences, I think at the core, the skills and the makeup of a platform team is not that different, honestly, to the kind of the skills and makeup of a team that's developing external facing products.
Cool. So you know, what when you're helping people adopt these platforms, what are like the there's all sorts of kind of like the rumored problems that everybody hears about with adoption, things like this. But what are some real problems that people are encountering, and like how are some of the ways you try to work through with them to get these either platforms either stood up, adopted, or just maintained over a long period of time? What are the types of things that people need to be aware of or pay attention for?
I think there's probably two factors I've seen that have had the most success, and success in loose terms, because it depends what you care about, right? What you're measuring. But
Yep.
A couple of approaches I've seen that have been, at least from an outside view, the most successful in driving both platform kind of instantiation and adoption. I think one that is really critical is having senior buy-in, or like a senior stakeholder who is the product champion. Like the most successful projects that I ever did with Pivotal, or like the most success I've seen like just talking to customers, right, has been like where you've got someone senior who really buys into the value and the productivity gains that a platform can bring.
Yep.
That's going to drive through change, because people are hard. And the biggest challenge in all these things, it's never the technology, it's always the people. It's the politics, it's the processes, it's the mindset that says, oh, no, we can't change for X reasons, right? So having a senior stakeholder who can kind of get the gates out the way and smooth things out and make stuff happen. I was going to swear then. Make stuff happen. I think that's really, really important. And I think for me, I've mentioned it a couple of times, but I think for me, the other thing that really can drive success is having a product mindset, particularly having a product manager in the team. Somebody who can, have an external view, have the voice of the customer that they're being able to bring in, that can have a roadmap and prioritize it, can externally share that roadmap, can really make the platform be a product that people want to use, right? And that might be focusing on developer experience. It might be having a platform evangelist, like you have you have a kind of developer evangelist, like you'd have a platform evangelist who's advocating their platform to the teams, right? Is having that product mindset. Everything you think about driving external product adoption, applying it internally, and actually funding it, I guess. Because do you know what I mean? Like sometimes people say, oh yeah, we're definitely going to do these practices, it's going to be great, but our platform team is only 4 people, so one person's going to sort of do this role a bit part-time. I mean, you get what you pay for. I don't know, like there's something about, like, if you really want to drive adoption, you have to think about the steps you're going to take to do it, and you have to have a person who's going to drive that, and that product mindset, and having a product manager is one of the best ways I've seen doing it.
I think, and that's really interesting to me, like the senior stakeholder thing is an interesting problem. So one of the things I try to convince people of sometimes is this idea that, like, if you're a platform team, so the obvious bad argument, you go to a bunch of application teams and you say, listen, I'm from the platform team and I will get a bonus only if you adopt my platform. So please adopt my platform now. And or my boss is about to come and tell you to adopt the platform because his bonus is tied to this thing, right?
Both are bad.
And so the same thing would go if you went to the application teams and you explain the platform as if you were from infrastructure. This is a way of making more efficiencies and lower cost of ownership. And like, to me, most product owners go, that's not how I win my game. I don't care about that. That's not the game I'm playing. Right. So you kind of have to, like, the platform teams have to explain to these senior product people how having the platform will help them win the game they're playing, which is, customer acquisition, being able to hit market timings, be able to get new features out at the right time. And so that conversation is requires you like almost the terrible word that I could use is have empathy for, but like you have to like think through the question of the platform from their perspective, not from your perspective, right? It can be true that you're creating all those other efficiencies and stuff like that. But they don't care about that part. Yeah.
100%.
Yeah.
I think that is the challenge, which is actually sort of a universal problem when it comes to even something like sales, right? Like, what's been fun for us learning, like doing this new startup, has been talking to people and understanding the barriers to adoption of the software that we're writing. Right. And it's not cost because it's open source. So free. It's free to use. What's the adoption? What's the blocker? And you're absolutely right. It's almost like a universal truth that if you want someone to adopt, if you want someone to buy what you're selling or adopt what you're offering, you can only kind of have that conversation if you have the empathy for the person that you are trying to help, because at the end of the day you actually are trying to help them and make their lives easier, but having that empathy, describing it back to them in their words and showing how it helps them. Like I say, it's true for platforms, it's true for selling anything, really.
Absolutely. And I just think it's like, again, the platform team gets in these weird situations because they have to sell a different story to the infrastructure team, right? Like don't let them go around me, Mr. Infrastructure Team. They should go through me. That argument ends up being an argument where you have to explain to infrastructure people if most of the work is consumed through the platform, it's going to make your life easier. This is how it's going to make your life easier, not just my life easier.
Yeah. Exactly.
And again, it's a different argument. So I don't know. What about like I have this like suspicion, this other suspicion that you can tell me how far off I am or not. But I have this suspicion that like this platform engineering thing is like revenge of the architects, right? Like it's like
I've not heard that before, but I like it.
we had this moment where we kind of like trust-falled all our architectures, like, oh, they'll just emerge if we just do clean code, like the architecture will take care of itself and all this kind of stuff. And now it seems like some of the questions that we're trying to answer in the platform engineering conversation seem like architecture questions, like old school architecture questions. So I mean, when you look around, the people that you're working with, are you having more conversations with architects, and like what flavor architects are you talking to? Like, I mean, I always think like enterprise architects are just extensions of procurement departments. So I don't ever find anything useful to talk to them, but like solutions architects feel like the type of people that we should be talking to about platforms, but they're not platform architects because they're more application-y focused, right? Like, is it a different type of architectural question or conversation? I don't know.
So that's a really good question, because I think in the space that we're playing in right now, we are trying to help. We're trying to help customers who have this mishmash of stuff. If you're never walking into a conversation where someone's like, hello, I'm a brand new startup and I have nothing, and please tell me how to build a platform, right? Those conversations don't happen. The conversations are always, well, we've got this pile of crap that we've had for 30 years, and then 100%. We've got these other things people have been adding in. And in some respects, almost like every conversation is an architecture conversation, because you, like I said, for me, the platform is that sandwich filler, and it's messy and it's complicated, and particularly these days where you've got people who've maybe built their own internal platform from scratch on Kubernetes, for example, and therefore there's tooling all over the place that is wired together in, who knows, like held together with duct tape and glue. And I mean, who knows what. And so, yes, there are many architecture conversations happening almost top to bottom. And I haven't really, until you asked that, I hadn't really thought about, is there a sort of, will there be a role emerging which might be like the platform architect role? I mean, when at Pivotal, when I was leading the platform services team for Europe, our team was solutions architects. That was the role. And those people would literally go out and help customers figure out how Cloud Foundry would fit into the organization and do lots and lots of modeling about like how to get to the infrastructure components and how to kind of wire things out to that. Like that was the role. Right? And yeah, I mean, you're right. Platform engineering, there's an awful lot of architecture in there. An awful lot.
So I feel like, to me, it's one of those things where it's a conversation between the two, the person you've been pointing out, this like product manager, maybe we call it like a platform manager. It's like this weird role of trying to figure out, well, again, from a product mindset, like what should we build? How do we service our customers? What's the roadmap look like from feature sets and all that kind of stuff? And then this other conversation, which I assume should be happening, which is with some architect who's looking at the product roadmap or the platform roadmap and saying, this is how we're going to have to do that architecturally. This is how we're going to have to build against that. This is like how we're going to make this stuff sustainable. And there's just so many places I've gone in and you go like, hey, like, do you have a product roadmap? Like, oh yeah, sure. Okay. Do you have a technology roadmap? Like, how are you going to roll out technology? Oh yeah. Did the people who wrote the technology roadmap and the people who wrote the product roadmap, did they ever talk about any of it? No. It's like, to me, it's like this new DevOps conversation, right? In the same way we need the developers to talk to the operators. Now we kind of like need these product owners to talk, product managers to talk to architects.
Yeah.
And take each other seriously and actually kind of evolve a new set of practices from there. But that's just my guess around that type of stuff.
It's interesting though, because it's sort of new and old. Totally. Like you mentioned, like there's new practices, but like there are some people I speak to, and like I said, I feel like I've been in this game for a long time. And it's like platform engineering is kind of new. You can see it when you look at Google Trends, right? You can see in the last like few years the dramatic increase in people searching for platform engineering. But it's also not new. It's not new, right? Because there's still, like I say, there's still these same kind of engineering practices. There's still architects that need to figure out how this stuff all fits together. There's still the people who are writing code, people who are running it. It's like it's new, but it's old. And I think there will be things that, like I say, I'm a big advocate for product managers within the platform team, and designers and developers, and this balanced team. And I think, is there an additional role for a platform architect? Maybe there is. Is that the same as an existing solution architect that's already in your organization? Quite possibly, it's some of the same skill set. Right? It's interesting. I think about it a lot as to like, is this really new? Are we just relabeling things? But I do think that there's an awful lot of past art that we are building on top of.
100%.
And there's probably some little nuances as we're trying to like continue this kind of evolution of DevOps is how I like to think about it.
So like I have this suspicion, right? This is another one of my suspicions about
You're
platforms.
a very suspicious guy, Jabe.
Very suspicious about platforms. But I have this other suspicion that so like you hear a lot right now, this conversation around moving from project to product. So this is similar to the conversation we've been having, like longstanding teams, different funding models, but also like this kind of customer focus, customer experience, user experience type stuff, which I think is all interesting and good. And I'm suspicious that there's this other movement happening, which I call service to platform. And what I mean by that is that, like, you're already pointing out it a little bit. Like, we've been doing something like platform stuff ever since we started doing service-oriented architectures, ever since we had service catalogs. All this is like platform-like stuff, right? And I think that one of the things that's happening, in my mind at least, is we have this new need to like share things in a different way than we've had before. So it looks kind of like open source, internal open source, where it meant you got access to other people's repositories, but now you have access to other people's running stuff, right? Mm-hmm. So it's like, that's one thing, is that like the code is not in a repository anymore. It's in operation.
Yeah.
And then the second thing is this idea that that the platform teams have to be operating these things continuously, right? Which is, I'm sorry, they have to be working with other people on the services to develop them, right? And what I mean by that is that in the old service, like the old ITIL style service thing, it's like, this is the service, this is the contract. You don't get to modify it. You can use it however you want, but this is a risk mitigation activity. There's a change management, change review board, like a whole pile of ways of trying to modify this thing, but it's going to take you forever. Whereas the platform teams, it seems like we're trying to build a layer above that, like hard to change stuff, where it has not the rapid spin, but like more spin. Therefore, like we need kind of different skill sets there, I think, than I imagine we had in the. I mean, it's certainly in the, like, ITIL service design was like as far away from what I imagine most people are doing with platforms as I can imagine right now. But I don't know.
I think there's some. I agree with you, and I think my suspicion. Let me use your framing. My suspicion is that the expectations coming from developers have changed because, on the one hand, to your first point, we've got the cloud, right? And people are used to now. They don't have to just kind of go to a limited set of services that are available and use them. They've got, I mean, depending on your cloud provider of choice, right? But there's like this huge swathe of services available, and they're not like you have to pick it off the shelf and do something. They are running, like services that are running that people can just get, right? And that's changed developer expectations.
Totally.
In my view, right? People are used to, oh, I want a thing, I'm just going to go get it. And so internal platform teams are trying to they need to be trying to offer that experience, right? Because if it's faster and better and easier to just use the cloud, that's where you get like the shadow IT. But then to your point about changing those services, right? That's where, like I say, what you described, like, kind of comes to the crux of like why my company's kind of trying to solve this. It's exactly what you described. People want the running services, but off the shelf doesn't quite cut it, because they do need some changes. They do need some customization. So you need a way to take as much off the shelf as you can, so that you aren't, rebuilding the wheel every single time. But you do need those things that are bespoke to your business, because if everyone's using the same commodity components, then there's no differentiation, right? And everything's the same. So you need that little bit of secret sauce on the top. You need to be able to tweak it. You need maybe the extra abstraction or the extra value or the extra thing. And so that's where the platform team magic lies for me. Like I say, they've got to be able to offer the things that gives a cloud-like experience. And they've got to be able to incorporate whatever is the secret sauce of your business, as well as navigating compliance and governance and billing, like all the things. But like, give people the cloud experience that they want, but it's the company platform that fits what the company needs.
100%. Yeah. And I think that's, to me, so I keep on saying to people, like, they'll say to me, like, I don't have a platform. I got a bunch of SaaS providers. Like, I'm just consuming services from other people, for instance. And I say, like, well, is there any code in your business that like moves data from one of the SaaSes to the other? Or like, you are like, have like single sign-on for the SaaS? Like, there's something probably gluing the SaaSes together, right?
Yeah.
And isn't that kind of like a platform then?
Exactly.
Like the stuff that glues the stuff together, it seems like that's the platform.
Yeah. Whether that's what you call it or not, right? That's the whole point.
Yeah. And so you get this weird thing. And I say sometimes I'm maybe overly provocative about it, but I say to people all the time, AWS is not a platform. It's not. It's a set of services that are offered. And you, as you've pointed out, have to make your own platform in your business that figures out how you want to combine those things and tweak them so that it works for you. That you can't just use it out of the box, and nobody does,
Exactly.
So I do think that's a interesting challenge for people to have to try to think through is, how do I minimize that glue code, but also recognize it as being like real, actual architectural problems, as opposed to like I let some guy script the stuff just to make it work.
Exactly.
Yeah, I think that's interesting to try to figure out where that stuff's going to go.
I do. I think it's interesting and exciting. Like I say, on the one hand, I feel like I've been trying to solve these same challenges for 10 plus years.
Yeah.
And on the other hand, I'm really excited that we're now having these kind of conversations.
Yeah.
Because I feel like even 5 years ago, this level of kind of engagement in our industry wasn't really there around the platform space.
Yeah.
And now that it is, I mean, I'm biased because I love it. And also I'm excited to see what comes out.
Yeah. I mean, the other thing that I am suspicious about that I think is possibly true is that one of the reasons why we're seeing this conversation happening is because most large enterprises are arriving at the level of complexity that caused like the FANG, which arrived at that level of complexity quicker, to have to make a platform or die, right? Like the answer is the reason that all those big operators have platforms is because if they hadn't made one, they'd be dead. They wouldn't have been able to survive, right? Yeah. And now you're getting these, like large banks, large medical groups, things like that are like, it's just too hard to run our estate the way we're running it. Yeah. We cannot do it like this anymore. Yeah. So then they have to start figuring out what a platform is. And that, I think, is interesting because it means that you're bringing just a lot more people into a conversation where there's a lot of pressure on them all of a sudden too, to figure it out.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think it's like, to your point, there's this, I've heard this term a couple of times, the DevOps burnout, which I think is also some part of it. There's like companies who are facing this complexity. There are these DevOps teams that have been asked to take on more and more and more. And that's part of it. It's not just that increase of technology change. It's the DevOps burnout where people are piling everything onto a DevOps team, and then that's too much.
Yeah. And then like, I mean, even though I would argue that the DevOps people have been trying to build platforms since day one, they don't, like a lot of DevOps teams don't have the mandate or tooling or skills for developing a real platform, right? Yeah, like it just, 100%. They're not set up that way.
No, for no fault of the team. Way.
Right, exactly.
Yeah. Like they're not funded in that way. They aren't, rewarded for that work. Like everything that you kind of think about as like steps to make a team successful.
Yep.
They aren't in place for those DevOps teams who are actually trying to build a platform.
Yeah, I think that's right. Yeah. And I mean, so you go into these places and it's like you get a feel for where they are in their evolution, and it's like, do you have infrastructure as a code to start with? Like, have you actually invested in trying to figure out how to maintain your infrastructure? Like, is that a thing here? Because if you haven't done that, I'm not sure exactly how you're going to build a platform on top of a pile of mud. But that would be interesting.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then you might get up into, okay, so you have some self-service access to some level of primitives or even some configuration stuff. Like now how much have you done to minimize the cognitive load for your developers? How much have you done to, make sure that this thing works for your operators and stuff like that? And that's pretty muddy right now, frankly. Yeah. Like people haven't really kind of converted the concept of infrastructure as code over to platform, right? They haven't really kind of understood in a lot of places that what we're trying to do is manage this complexity by using software to manage it as opposed to humans, which is exactly what we were trying to do at the beginning of DevOps, just infrastructure initially. So I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, my team's been working on a framework that we've been calling like this platform maturity model. sort of to that point, because what we've been experiencing is, let's say, everybody. Well, on the one hand, everybody likes a maturity model so they can see where they are. Whether you like them or loathe them, right?
Yep.
There's like something reassuring about seeing a bunch of steps and figuring out where you are on a matrix.
Yep.
But also for us, it was something similar about like, well, what do we think is going to make a platform successful in an organization, and what are the general steps to get there? So we came up with kind of like a first draft, which we've now given to the CNCF.
Yep.
So there's a platforms working group within the CNCF, which has written a white paper about platforms, which is really good, and I'd recommend. And that same working group is looking at, like I said, we kind of came up with this first draft. We've got a bunch of really smart people to help us like wordsmith it a bit, and then we've donated it with the hope that it can guide people on the journey. I mean, maturity models, like I say, some people don't have much time for them, and some people find them useful, and some people find them a checkbox exercise. There's everything in between, but just having something to guide people to say, like say, what does you like? Do you know what your infrastructure is doing? Do you have kind of some funding for a platform team? There's like some basic kind of metrics that you can look at and be like, well, actually, maybe I do need to make an improvement here or an improvement there. And that was the reason why we wanted to put something out in the world, and ideally then help people mature. Yeah, exactly. Whatever that looks like for an actual organization. Like, it's not like step by step you have to do these things, but more just like in a general way of improvement, here's some paths that you could take.
And I think like those paths are important. We can argue about maturity models at some point, but I do think it's important.
People love them or loathe them, right? But I mean, they're a tool.
I think it's important to have some way of saying that there is kind of like a step-by-step process of coming to understand certain things. And I usually refer to them as like choose your own adventure. Not everybody gets there the same way, but there's these choices you have to make, where you're going to focus, stuff like that. And I think, like as a really silly example, like one of the things that I find with teams that are having a hard time with Kubernetes is you ask them, like, how did they get started? And they start with Kubernetes, and you say, well, wait a second, did you have a bunch of containers? No, we made containers on, and I'm like, so you didn't have the problem that Kubernetes was supposed to solve. So how did you know you were doing it well? Like, how did you, like, and it's this problem where, it's like that hindsight problem. Magically, you can go out and buy a book that will tell you, all of the possible things you can do to a container inside of Kubernetes to make it perfect. And if you start there, it's going to take you forever to get anywhere, because, you're just going to, it's like gold plating something instantly, right?
Yes.
As opposed to this idea like that the platform should almost like, it should solve a certain problem right now, and it should predictably cause another problem afterwards that you're going to then, like, that's the evolutionary thing, is that you actually expose the team to new evolutionary pressures as the platform evolves, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And that means you can't go to the end of the story. You have to kind of go through the story somehow to learn how these things work, I think.
Yeah, and I think I mean, it's easy to say, but what you want to do is figure out your starting point. Like, you need to assess where you are now to have any idea of, like, are we improving? I find it funny. I saw somebody gave a presentation. I'm not going to name and shame, but somebody gave a presentation where they had moved some applications to Kubernetes, like your example you just described, right? I don't know if they'd ever used Kubernetes before or even containers before, but they gave a presentation about what they'd done, which was a great presentation. But at the end, the question I asked was, what were the metrics for success? Like, did you have a before and after? Did you take a baseline of like, I don't know, speed to deploy or whatever your DORA metrics are, like whatever the things were? Did you take a measurement at the before and then an after? And the answer was no.
No.
I was like, well, how? I tried so hard not to be sarcastic, but in my mind I was screaming, how do you know it was better?
Absolutely, 100%. I used to like do this talk where I called it learning like a scientist. I'd get dressed up in a white coat. I have it over there.
Nice.
I'll find it. But and I'd get on stage and I'd say, I'm going to teach you guys all how to do science today. And I'd say at the end, it's very simple to do science. Have an idea, write it down, show it to 2 or 3 of your best friends. do the thing, and then make sure your best friends come back and hold you accountable for what was actually written down. That's how you learn. And most humans can't learn if they don't do that, because they'll fool themselves into thinking, oh, this is totally what I thought was going to happen.
Exactly.
As opposed to writing it down and being like, oh, right, I didn't think this was going to happen. I think that's interesting. So what if somebody's listening, if people are listening, what are like 3 big topics you think that they could take away from this, or from the platform thinking kind of engineering movement? What should people be paying attention to right now, you think?
Okay, I've got 3 kind of recommendations, I guess. I've mentioned it already, but I'll mention it again. I would definitely recommend reading Team Topologies.
Yep.
It's not a thick, heavy book. It's quite lightweight. It's very nice. What we love about it is we think about it as this common vocabulary that you can use in an organization. So I'd strongly recommend that. I'd suggest, I've also mentioned a couple of times, so Platform Con is a free virtual conference that ran for the first time last year and this year. There's a potentially overwhelming amount of content, to be honest. There's an awful lot of content in there. I think this year they had 168 videos.
Wow. Yeah.
I mean, an awful lot of content, but each video is only 15 minutes.
Yep.
So quite easy to consume. And so there's some really good ones. I mentioned Gregor's talk from last year and Mathieu's talk from last year. I'll do a plug for my talk I gave this year, which is a little bit about, my talk was about from infrastructure to app deployment, where does the platform start and end?
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, cool.
And I talked about doing the Vogue, which was like, it's here or it's here, which was quite fun. So I recommend that kind of stuff. And then I'd say another thing maybe to pay attention to, again, I've mentioned it, but if you're in the CNCF, Cloud Native Computing Foundation space, if you're in the Kubernetes space, then there's a platforms working group. It's part of the app delivery tag. And they are continuously trying to work with the community to get feedback, to get people looking right now, they're looking at the maturity matrix, which I mentioned, but it's kind of open source. Everything's transparent. They have these meetings every couple of weeks. They're looking for contributors. Like, it's a fantastic way to hear what everyone else is worrying about, actually, and contribute into the community as well.
Cool. Awesome. And if people want to support your work and the stuff you're doing, how can they find you? What should they do to see your open source project that you're working on, things like that? How can people support you?
I'm glad you asked that, Jabe. So our framework is called Kratix. So that's KRTIX.io. And on there, I mean, it's on GitHub, but you can go to our Kratix.io website and you can see there's a workshop which is self-paced. You can work through.
Cool. Yeah.
What we're really looking for right now, what we need more than anything, is feedback. Look at our framework. Look at what we've written. Tell us what doesn't work. Tell us why you wouldn't adopt it. Cool. Tell us what's wrong with it. Like, we are designing. We want to work with people to design the thing that solves the problem of like platform. Building the right level of kind of decomposability of the platform. And so any feedback, good or bad, we'd love to hear it.
Cool. Well, Paula, you have to come back and we'll talk more about decomposing platforms again in the future. I had a great time talking with you. I'm going to let you go. It's late there, but I had a great time.
It's a little late. Thank you so much for having me there, Jabe. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah. I'll see you next time. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.